All right, so what I wanted to do in this segment was focus more on extreme weather events that Dr. Jan had introduced you to and started talking about. I think we're all definitely aware of the spate of hurricanes that have hit the U.S. over the past month. We have Hurricane Irma, we had Hurricane Harvey in Texas, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Jose, although that one didn't make landfall per se. And some questions that obviously come to mind with these hurricanes is, one may be, how does this compare with previous years in terms of frequency of hurricanes? So here's an interesting table showing that the current year is coming pretty close to what used to be the record year, or still is at this point, 2005, for the number of tropical storms. And they say named storms, saying that it had to reach a certain intensity level. And of those, how many were hurricanes? And then of those, how many were Category 3 or higher, which means that's strong or intense. And many experts, meteorologists, climatologists are saying, realize that the hurricane season this year is not over yet. Many think that this year will surpass the previous record-setting year, and that this will now be the record-setting year for, again, number of tropical storms, and perhaps more importantly, the intensity of these storms. And that's one of the things that I find particularly interesting about some of the hurricanes that have been occurring, particularly with Irma, some of the records that Hurricane Irma set. Many people are aware of the fact that it was the strongest Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, but also the fact that it was strong for so long. And one that doesn't appear here that I found really interesting was what they call, it set a record for intensification, which is how fast it intensifies into a major storm from a tropical depression to hurricane level. That on record, no hurricane had intensified, gone up to full strength that quickly. And say, okay, that's hurricanes. As Dr. Jan aptly and correctly said, how does climate change fit into all this? Climate change does not cause hurricanes, but it does contribute in many important ways. And one of the ways that Dr. Jan had mentioned is, particularly with hurricanes, is warmer oceanic waters. The Atlantic has data clearly show that many portions of the Atlantic, particularly the Caribbean, are significantly warmer than they were half a century ago, even 3-4 decades ago. I think that's slide for Harvey. Oh yeah, Hurricane Harvey, a lot of people aware, is the amazing amount of rainfall that was dumped in this region. Definitely record-setting. In fact, one of the most interesting parts about this I found when I was listening to news about it and scientific discussions about it was meteorologists, when they were constructing these rainfall maps, said they pretty much ran out of colors, that they didn't have colors to represent how the amount of rainfall that had taken place. It was much higher than their maximum, what they would represent for their color. They had to come up with new colors to represent that. So back to hurricanes as an extreme weather event, and we can clearly show the relationship between their intensification and their strength with warming of oceanic waters. But if we step back and look at other weather events or all weather events together, there are many graphs you can show that just show similar trend, clear trend. That this one includes, one thing I like about this graph is that, okay, with the height of these bars, they're showing climate-related disasters. So we have hurricanes, we have major storms, flooding, rainfall, even winter storms. And they include heat waves in this as well. And obviously there's a clear and distinct pattern here of a rapid, significant increase in the frequency of those events. Compare that with other types of disasters, geophysical. So you have earthquakes, even volcanic activity, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with climate change and global warming, and there is no significant trend and increase of that. So you can clearly show that it's kind of, most people would say for sure, but to make the distinction that the type of disasters we're talking about are those that are climate related. And the other nice thing about this graph is doesn't just show the frequency, but also the damage that these events cause, how that has risen quite significantly. So if we focus a little more on the impacts of that, weather events, many of them are obvious and come to mind, but also some of them you have to think a little more about and how indirect they are and the impacts they have. And a source I want to go to show you that is a really good website that a lot of this information I present to you shows. So again, I encourage you to seek out, information on these topics yourselves. You'll find there is just a wealth and plethora of good, sound, scientifically based information there in many places. We have the peer-reviewed scientific articles definitely to go to, but we also have sites that present those often in a easier to read format. And here's such one. This website is from the Global Change Program. It's a U.S. program that was established a few years ago, just to show you, one thing I always like to tell students when you're evaluating websites, probably one of the first things you always want to go to is the About tag, if there is one, or to see what that organization is about, to try and start to help you gauge the validity, accuracy of the information you're about to see or is presented. So this is a research program that was established, back in 1989. But then what's really interesting when you look at the mandate, how, you can obviously read through this yourselves when you get a chance, but when you go down to one of the major goals is to present before President and Congress summaries, evaluations, interpretations of the scientific information's out there. So this is a great almost clearinghouse, if you will, of which there are many out there on the website that does a really good job of assimilating the information, making sense of it, presenting it, again, in a fairly easy to read format, and draw the conclusions for that. A couple other things I like about this website is that, as any good website should do, is that when you start reading the information that's in there, it does cite sources that you can go to that list at the end from peer-reviewed scientific articles to see where they're getting their information from. And something else I like about this website if we go to the section on threats to human health, which is what the topic of this talk is about, or any of these sections, but this is the section we're going to spend some time on. You'll see that they have it broken down into different categories, which is really what we're addressing here today. Between Dr. Jan and I, we're kind of decided to each of us take a handful of each of these topics. When you look at the information presented with any one of them, you have a summary, you have key findings, which we'll go to in a minute. You have information that you can see in much more detail that the report is based on, as well as graphs and figures. And what I'm getting at here is one of the things I really like about this website is the statements that are presented. Whoops, too far there. Particularly, well, anywhere in the report, but it's also here in the key findings, is after any particular statement, what they have in brackets is the degree of confidence or certainty, if you will, probability we have about making these statements. That's a really important part about science that often gets overlooked or not judged is what degree of confidence do we have in making these statements? How certain are we of these? And so this gives you a nice, clear idea. And even this isn't that just qualitative that the people who are writing this information, what they feel, these levels of confidence are based on more quantitative assessments or measures and definitions of what they mean by, we're very confident of this statement. Here's what that means, et cetera. And again, that's an important part of science and assessing information that you find. So having said that, let's go ahead and look at what the key findings are in this report for extreme weather events. oops, get back down to 2 here. You know what, before we even look at that, this is a really useful graph that I find very useful, that is in this report. Again, looking at the types of extreme weather events, breaking it down by type here. We have heat waves, tornadoes, hurricanes, and what this graph part of it shows is a quantification of fatalities associated with that. And I don't know if Dr. Jan will say more about heat waves, but something that a lot of people don't maybe realize is heat waves are deadly and a major source of mortality globally. Especially, compare it with these other events. You can see that in the U.S. at least, there's more mortality associated with heat waves than any other type of extreme weather event, which you may not think right off. And then over here on the right, they have estimate of the amount of damage in billions of dollars during this decade that's noted at the top, associated with these different types of events. So obviously, there's an enormous amount of damage that they cause. There's mortality that they cause. So we have to take them seriously because of those impacts. And if we go back to this site again and look at the key findings of this report, just changing them. So increased exposure, that the expectation is that, no surprise, that as the climate continues to change through global warming, that more people will be exposed to extreme weather events, and thus there'll be more damage. The probability of higher number of fatalities, mortalities associated with that, both directly, as Dr. Jan explained it, and importantly, indirectly through these other mechanisms and these other ways. So this is talking about exposure risk in different regions of the United States. Oops. And this is an important one, and I think this is really, is evident when you look at the news coverage of the aftermath of the hurricanes, what's happening in Puerto Rico, what has happened in Florida, is damage to infrastructure. I guess it's going to scroll itself through these. The importance of that can't be understated. Much of the problem, as I'm sure people are aware of, that Puerto Rico's experienced right now is this major damage to infrastructure where it's really hampering their abilities to even just do the first step of recovery, which is just trying to still rescue people and try and get people in a situation where they're at lower risk of dying, that they're having trouble even getting to those people because the roads are impassable due to erosion and down power lines, lack of gasoline, fuel to get to those places, et cetera, et cetera. So disruption and destruction of essential infrastructure, and obviously that's very costly to repair and restore. We have key finding 3 that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of with extreme weather events, particularly with hurricanes. One of the major types of damage they cause is from the storm surge. And with sea levels continuing to rise and with the coastal erosion that causes, apart from storms, when you have the storm surge from the storms, you're just increasing the risk of those coastal areas to flooding and the damage that's associated with that. So those are the 3 key findings associated with extreme weather events. Yeah, I think so. That's all I really wanted to show or talk about with extreme weather events. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Jan for